Hello, and everyone, and welcome to our webinar on managing games as a service multiplayer communities for long-term success. I'm Scarlet, Chief of Staff here at High-Res Studios, and I'm thrilled to be hosting this session. Today, we'll be diving into unique challenges and opportunities that come with fostering healthy, engaged communities in the world of games as a service. I'm joined by Tony Jones, our lead producer and a true expert in the field, with over 15 years of experience managing player communities and ensuring games experiences remain fun and inclusive. Tony has been instrumental in shaping the strategies we'll be discussing today, and he'll walk us through practical tools and case studies that illustrate how RallyHere supports studios at every stage of their games journey. Whether you're tackling player retention issues or working to create a safer in-game environment, today's session is packed with insights that will help you strengthen your community management strategies. Let's dive in. Tony, could you give us a little bit of an overview of the critical role of player experience and behavior management in games as a service?
Sure. There is a real correlation between community health and retention. There are a lot of good examples out there. There's a ton of social research that you can go and see. I think Thriving in Games is doing a great job of presenting a lot of data. There are research statistics that are put out by the Anti-Defamation League almost every year now that have shown a direct correlation between toxic behavior and good community sentiment, and showing people's ability to, whether they want to stay in a game or not, right? How it directly impacts their desire to continue playing a product or not. But yes, I would definitely recommend checking out the ADL's reports. Those are super insightful.
Perfect, thanks. What are some measurements that can be used to help track player data and identify community health?
Yeah, KPIs are really important. You should always be measuring everything, but some of the ones that I have found particularly helpful in the player experience world, things like daily active users, monthly active users, day 1, day 7, day 30 retention. These are all data points that your development teams will be tracking anyway, but on the player experience side, watching those data trends can give you an insight into where, if it matches up with your sentiment. Community managers spend a lot of time learning sentiment, and unfortunately, sentiment, there's a lot of AI tools that will help you gauge that sentiment now, but traditionally reading through a lot of the sentiment behavior, you want hard data to run that against, right? If your sentiment's super positive and your Dow's going up, okay, that sentiment's probably good, right? That sentiment is going in the direction you want it to. There's marketing data. NPS scores are useful. Your marketing team likes getting those anyways. Having that score will let you know, watching that trend going up and down will also give you a good idea of what you should be tracking. I like to track CSAT. Your player support team should be tracking CSAT every time someone makes a support request. How satisfied were they? Watching that trend is super helpful to let you know. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of tools out there that are starting to, with AI, that are starting to churn through all this data and start to report sentiment and learn. I still think it's got a little ways to go, but it is miles ahead of where we've been over the previous years. Another one that I use a lot is player reports. Not always the best indicator. You do have players that report players just because they're upset about something, they're upset with their game. But they do, watching that volume of reporting can give you an idea of how you're managing your overall sentiment and your overall approach to trust and safety. Social media KPIs are another good one. What's your Twitter engagement like? What are the engagement on the post, especially around your important announcements? And the last one's UGC. Are players making as much content as they were? If they're making more content, at least it's positive content. You don't necessarily want all the negative content, but if they're making more positive content, more creators are coming in, that's a really good indicator of community health.
Perfect. And in your experience, what are the more common signs that a game's community health is affecting player retention, and how can studios help identify those issues early?
Yeah, poor social media sentiment is a good start. Look at your posts when you announce something. Are people even engaging with that particular topic, or are they just yelling at you that your game is broken, or they don't like something else that you're doing? That's an immediate factor that you may have a sentiment issue there. Again, influencers and creators, has their sentiment shifted? Were they initially positive, now they're super negative? Start digging into the reasons behind that. If you're doing testing, If you're in your early access period and you're texting, has your engagement dropped? Are as many people testing as they were? Are as many people engaged as they were? The most dangerous one is silence. Does anybody care? If no one's responding at all, that's part of a bigger issue. What you can do around this really is just identification, looking at feedback loops, creating areas that you're able to bolster this information you're getting from the players and make sure it's getting to the right people. Doing surveys. Surveys are a great way to get targeted information out of players in a way that some people like to give lengthy feedback. Some people just want to play your game, right? And you're bothering them if you're asking them questions. So you ask them very simple questions and they can just give you a quick yes or no or rate it 1 to 5. And that actually gives you a great data point to be able to understand how something is impacting them. And the last one is just test sessions with non-employees. Just get some people together, go find some college students, give them some pizza, and just get them to give you your feel. Find your neighbor's kids, sit them down in front of the game and get their feedback.
And how do you feel like you can get engagement when the feedback isn't there? The players aren't
It's
fully
really,
excited to share.
it's really challenging to do. If you don't have any feedback, you have to start from somewhere. It really goes back to just building good feedback loops. You don't want to overcomplicate them, but you need to create somewhere. Like, where are you getting this information from? You need to make a connection with the people that are testing your game or that are playing your game, and get that feedback to you. Pick your medium and you start building, and be consistent when you do it. Is the best advice I can offer on that.
Perfect. Can you explain how focusing on community health translates to tangible benefits and player retention?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton of social research out there. Like I said, Thriving in Games is a great place. It can give you a bunch of information. There's so much social research around self-determination theory and the Proteus effect. Sorry. We fortunately had a lot of research that went into MMOs about 15, 20 years ago, because it
Mhm.
was the perfect social experiment to start looking at how people engaged with games. And because of that, we learned that players really want to experience that relatedness, that autonomy, that competence. So the more belonging they feel in your game, the greater attachment they have to it. So the more it impacts your retention, because they're going to want to play more. Toxic behaviors. An example, in 2021, we had an exit survey for Smite, and toxic
Mhm.
behavior was actually listed as a number 2 reason that people left the game. And we noticed that with our retention and for months. And it was something that we investigated deeply and made corrective action for. But we saw it directly with Smite 1.
Perfect. Shifting gears a little bit and converting over to tools and strategies for community moderation. Can you tell me a little bit about RallyHere's technology-driven solutions to help out with this area?
Sure. The technology that we're using around Rally here it's important, and it's work that's going to help us really take more advantage of machine learning. Machine learning is so important right now. One of the things that I've seen it do over my career is it's improved scale. We're approaching things in different ways that we never have before. Traditionally, our approach in the past with trust and safety was there was so much data that it wasn't about addressing all the data. It was about filtering and prioritizing the data so you could
Mhm.
address the most egregious portion of the data when it came to enforcement. Because of the speed and automation of AI, we're actually able to impact entire data sets. It's no longer about, okay, let's target the top 1%. We can actually look at all of this and determine and make deterministic actions based on the severity of each thing. Even though there's 2,000 incidents and we only would have gotten through 100, we can now look at all
Mhm.
2,000. And it's allowing us to move away from an environment focus. We can look at account creation, voice, Toxmod. Some of the stuff they've been able to do with Toxmod, it's incredible. There are things it can detect that would only be able to be done manually by a human. And we obviously can't listen to
Mhm.
all the voice chat in every match, in every game. It's humanly impossible. GetGoat is another example. The data they're able to send us, and for us to be able to actually observe a match is incredibly powerful, and allows us to see behaviors that we wouldn't have been able to detect in We've never been able to. It's been very challenging to detect intentional feeding. It's a hard thing to detect, because where's that line between bad play and feeding? When you have this observational technology, when you go through and replay the match and see someone running up the right lane over and over, you're like, okay, that's definitive data that I was not able to review before. So it's an exciting time.
Very cool. Yeah, as a newer Smite player, I'm definitely just a bad player, and I promise I'm not a feeder.
But we look at the data point, right? There are other data points like how many games have you played? We're not going to look at a player who's played 5 games, even if they are running up the right lane. We're not going to immediately say, oh, they're feeding, right? Because they're a new player. But having AI bring all these data points together for us in a quicker way makes that job much easier to do.
And for those that might be a bit newer to trust and safety, what would you say are the most essential elements to focus on first?
The first step that I advise every time is just align your stakeholders. Find out who cares about trust and safety within your organization, get them together, and just scope out the problem. What do you consider toxic behavior? What are your cultural values as a company? Right? What are you trying to promote within your game? Where are you comfortable? Where are you not comfortable? Because everyone needs to be on the same page of the problem, or you're creating multiple solutions for multiple problems, right? Everybody needs to agree, this is our problem. This is what we're trying to solve. Once you do that, you build your framework. Identify the owners of each piece of it, whether it's your community managers, player support team, QA, like it doesn't matter. Every company works differently, but whoever's involved in that process, just you give them ownership of that piece of it, and you create that process. Then you do a statement, right? Sometimes it's the most simple forms of ban policy. I really like EA's fair play policy. I think they've done a great job of just outlining, this is what we believe, this is what we want in our game, this is the type of atmosphere we're trying to promote. And these are the expectations we have for you as someone who plays our online games. And then try and understand what players do when they experience disruptive behavior. Do they report it? Do they get mad? Do they monkey that behavior? Do they imitate it? What happens in understanding that player experience? To me, that's where you start.
Perfect. Kind of building off of that, when you build that framework, what have you seen from the studios that you've worked at in the past, a successful framework?
Success framework. It's starting in games now. Free Play Alliance has a really good framework. If you want to nerd out on all the social research and look at a decade of super smart people, they are incredibly intelligent people. They've dedicated so much of their time to develop these amazing frameworks. In a more practical sense, if you don't want to become a social researcher, which God bless them, I love them. Like they're at the tip of the spear. I'm more like the handle of the spear. It's really just, again, about scoping out the problem. You build out the framework and then you build the process, right? What does our in-game reporting system look like? What behaviors are we looking for automatically? Most importantly, what happens? What is our policy? What happens to players? How are we communicating that to players? Can players appeal these decisions? Are we providing transparency around what we're doing? Are we doing a transparency report? And looking at that framework and just building that out, each individual piece, I think is what's really important.
Thank you. What does the process look like when RallyHere begins working with a studio, on community health plans, and where do you start?
First thing we do is we get to know their game and their audience and their company culture. What's important to them? What do they want to accomplish? Every company has a different vision, or at least a slightly different vision of who they are and what their values are and how that translates into their community. And making sure that we appreciate that. We don't just come in with our own experiences and our own culture. We also look at the feedback loops. Those are so important. How you get your information for your players is so crucial. What data points do you have? How are you measuring what your community sentiment is? Where is all this information coming from? And also, what existing resources do you have in place? Companies vary in size, vary in disciplines. Do you have community managers? How much player support do you have? Is your QA team involved? Do you have a designer involved? What do you have that's available? And what can we do to prepare for whatever you might be facing? We also come in and look at a lot of trust and safety issues can be avoided in the design world. Like, how early can we convince you of the particular value of this feature, right? Are you interested in your ping system? Here are some guidelines for the ping system, right? Have you developed these things that will make your ping system less frustrating and lead to less toxicity?
Very cool. And I know you have some real world examples from working on site and other games. Could you share some that illustrate how these tools and strategies have made a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. From a player experience perspective, we had a small team working on a mobile title. Stats iteration, because it was a mobile title, we were basically looking at a launch in South America, right? But how do we create growth efficiently and keep momentum when the game is only launching to a limited market? How do we get feedback from the team with minimal resources?
Hmm.
How we addressed that was we looked at player surveys. I worked with the lead designer at the time to develop these player surveys that were providing all that information. And so we at least had that feedback loop continually going. And we brought in a localized resource, a contractor, to community manage directly in that language within Latin America. Because yes, we could translate it, but that time lag, that ability to have real-time communication was so important with that community because it gave us that feedback. They could report to us directly what players were thinking, and we didn't have to. You lose something with a survey that you don't have in real time because there's not a back and forth, right? The surveys are still insanely valuable. The data points are insanely valuable, but when you have a player willing to take time to actually talk about your game and your product with you and how they feel about it, how they perceive it, that's invaluable if you can get that information from them. That's a smaller solution. On a large solution, I've worked on large teams that had an existing live service and it had waning interest and there was various issues of frustration. So the problem we were looking at was how do we address the largest issue? How do we improve retention monetization without impacting the development pipeline significantly? And what we did was we created a targeted initiative identifying the largest community issues. We invested some actual development bandwidth into tackling these issues. We pulled features off, we pulled content off, and we created transparency around the work. And the most important thing was we marketed this update. This update was, hey, we're coming to fix the game, right? All the stuff you guys have been complaining about, we want to fix this, right? We agree these are issues. We're going to come in, we're going to fix this, we're going to fix this, and we're going to talk to you about it. We're going to have live streams about it. We're going to tweet about it constantly and make it this. We turned basically what was a large, I don't even think it was a bug initiative because it wasn't all about bugs. Sometimes it was just improving features, but what was a low traditional content update into a huge marketing beat for that particular title. And to give you the most famous example of Rainbow Six did this, I think it was, I can't remember the name of the initiative, but Rainbow Six did this. They took an entire, I think, quarter and they did this huge quality of life update and it was huge.
Yeah, that's definitely always something that the players get very excited for. It's something that they care about, and seeing the devs, how much they care and reciprocation is wonderful. Kind of switching subjects a bit again, what kind of measurable outcomes do we see when the community health is prioritized?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that I see is improved feedback quality and volume. It's less, hey, people are yelling the same thing over and over, fix your game, but it's more about, great, okay, it's cool, you fixed that. What about this? People are actually starting to bring you more feedback because A, they think you're actually listening, and B, they think you're actually are going to fix it, and C, they're not coming in and they're bringing it in a negative way like you won't fix it. There's an actual, you can see the shift. You can see the shift in an individual that has trust within the game team to fix their issue versus someone who doesn't, right? That there's a huge shift once you have that into positive sentiment. Improve general sentiment. Are people yelling less, yelling more? Are people bringing more concerns? Are people more excited about things? There's an energy you feel within the community when things are very exciting. And one of the ones that I personally look for with my experience is communication. Is the thing that's always coming up. That's one of the huge red flags in community health is when you see people bringing up the devs should be talking to us. Why aren't they talking to us? Why aren't they telling us these things? That's When that's not coming up, that's a very good sign.
Perfect. And going back a little bit more to trust and safety, can you give me some insights on how RallyHere's trust and safety services foster stronger connections between players and studios?
Yeah, it's important to know that trust and safety, it's an investment in your community. There's no ways about it. It's a varying investment. Some companies are able to invest millions of dollars. Some are, and they can invest thousands of dollars. But it is an investment, your time and effort in the community. And with the tools available, you can do a lot more scaled and a lot less ad hoc. And expectations are growing for this from your customer base. So it's not something that we can really avoid. Work with your teams, like your community manager, player support, to create a unified process in dealing with disruptive behavior. It can be broken up a bunch of different ways. How you define disruptive behavior. Some people break cheating out entirely. It's disruptive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
If it ruins the experience of one or more people in your game during an interaction, it's disruptive behavior. It doesn't matter if it's cheating, harassment, exploits, it's all an issue. And it's done in different ways, but it's all a similar problem. One of the problems that I see is that CMs are already stretched thin. They need that additional support. They need that extra time and effort from various other teams. Even just if it's an hour from a game designer can make such a huge difference to a community manager who's spending 10 hours a week on trust and safety. I think it builds stronger connections. It also invests everyone. I think it goes back to ownership, right? You have each piece of the pie, you have an owner. And because there's ownership, there's investment. And that investment, it ultimately is in your community.
Sure.
Yeah.
How do you see that role of the trust and safety evolving more as studios are adopting more games as a service models? And are there any trends that you think people should be watching for?
I think games as a service models, they highly encourage player interaction. And the more players interact, the more trust and safety is important to them. Studios, I believe, are going to start thinking about more from a design perspective versus enforcement. There is again, you can solve a lot of your problems in early design that don't require as much enforcement. Enforcement's not going to go away, but I think it could take a back seat to just better design, thinking in advance. This environment that we're creating, what are we doing that's frustrating players? What can we do to not frustrate players? Because when players in a multiplayer game get frustrated, they take it out on each other. And ultimately that just churns and it creates learned behavior that other players pick up and it just spreads like wildfire. And then you just end up in the enforcement world. So I think design is really going to be an area for growth over the next few years with a lot of studios, just learning to design. It's not even better, it's just differently. It's just in ways, and fixating on things that we didn't think as much about traditionally.
And what advice would you give studios that might be struggling to foster that cross-functional collaboration between their community department and then their development team?
Embed resources where you can. I've worked both embedded and not embedded within game teams directly. I think there's an argument for both, but there's not a better way to invest trust and safety teams and individuals than to have them embedded with your team and to have a voice and to have an understanding of what the challenges are, what the product is, understanding the development process, understand the capacity for the team to do things. Have your teams report data around trust and safety issues. Find those stakeholders that will read that data and understand that data. And game teams are data driven. They don't operate based on I won't say they don't operate. It's very possible. It's human nature to operate on sentiment. But good design teams and good overall development teams are very data driven. They should be reading data. Trust and safety can present that data. Present data as here's how things are going. Here's how things could go if we did this.
Right, yeah, I do think it's very easy to want to make those decisions based off your heart. So it's nice to have that on paper, a lot more clear. Community in dev, these being pretty player-facing positions, it can be difficult to take all that feedback. Are there ways that developers can help support them, the community roles, the game dev roles, through the hardships of dealing with community?
Yeah, I think you should be leaning heavily on whoever's doing your community management, whoever is doing the day-to-day interaction with the community. That's always someone. Then making sure that if they're well trained, they can, first of all, they're another person. If you're dealing with a difficult individual, they can take that person off your hands, right? Or if you're just, it's also knowing when to take a step back. There's a great resource out there called Safe in Our World. They they provide advice around general overall mental wellness around video games.
Mhm.
But I think it's great. It's great to have an understanding of where your limitations are. Even community managers who do this all the time have limits, right? It's first thing I tell community managers, like, you have off time. Like, at some period, you need to switch it off, right? Because your mind cannot handle all of it. So really just providing support for that individual as a group and having multiple people shoulder some of that load will really help everybody, because you're diversifying it and you're spreading it out instead of just having one individual try and shoulder the entire problem themselves.
Thank you. And if there is one thing that attendees should be taking away from today's session, what would that be?
I think, honestly, again, it's developing a scalable trust and safety strategy for your studio and for your game. It's not an easy process. It's going to take work. It's going to take time. It's not going to be the thing you're going to want to think about initially, because if you don't have a solid game, what do you need trust and safety for? Like, obviously, your game, your product have to come first. But the longer you wait to start thinking about some of these things, the harder it's going to be for you to initiate them. And the more likely you're going to be in a situation where you're moving reactively versus proactively.
Perfect. That is it for today's webinar. I want to thank you all for joining us. We hope this session has given you a deeper understanding of how RallyHere's approaches community health, trust and safety, and the tools that we use to support studios in creating engaging and resilient communities. A special thank you to Tony for sharing his experience and real-world expertise. If you're interested in learning more about how RallyHere can support your game, feel free to reach out to us directly. We'd love to chat further with you. Thank you all.